Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. In today's episode, I would like to talk a little bit more about Tadej Pogačar because the Slovenian is getting on fine form already after his victory at the Tor of France in 2024, where he won his third Tor de France, beat Jonas Vingegaard by over 6 minutes, but he just got done winning in Montreal. He had a good showing on Friday's race in Quebec, where I believe if Tadej Pogačar, and I believe he believes it too, if he doesn't hesitate with Arnaud Delis on his wheel, possibly he drops Arnaud Delis and ends up winning Quebec. But either way, it was a fine showing where he went on good form. Then he waited 2 more days. Following Sunday there on the weekend in Montreal, he started the next one-day race, his last preparation race before he gets ready for the Men's Road World Championship at over 270 kilometers. It's going to be a monster race, and we have incredible talent coming into the Road World Championships because you have Tadej Pogačar. You have his compatriot there, Primož Roglič, that's showing up. He's added himself to the list there for Slovenia, and they got 7 guys listed on their roster at this moment. But when we start looking at some of the other talent there, Remco Evenepoel showing up, trying to win himself another Road World Championship. He has one from a couple years back, of course. And then we start looking at the current Road World Champion, Mathieu van der Poel, is going to show up in Zurich, and he's going to have an appearance. So that's 4 of the top 6 first-page riders up here on the Butterfly Effect and Beyond the Coverage that we're going to see battling out at this year's 24 edition of the Road World Championships. But how prepared is Tadej Pogačar? How has his style of racing changed when we look at his racing at Montreal, when we look at his racing at Quebec, and when we go further back into the Tor de France, when we go into LBL, when we go into Milan-San Remo, when we go to Strade Bianche, when we're talking about the Giro d'Italia? The Slovenian and UAE team members have finally started to evolve their training to what I told you since day one when I was talking about Tadej Pogačar on the Butterfly Effect, when we're going all the way back into 2020 and 2021. Tadej Pogačar and UAE Team Emirates, especially in 2021 at that year's Tour de France, what were they doing wrong? Well, they were sending guys up the road all throughout the early stages of the Tour de France, with Brandon McNulty going for attacks, Rui Costa was going for attacks, Davide Formolo was following attacks, and we even had Mark Hirschi following attacks in that Tour de France. I was covering it live for NBC, and then, of course, delivering you guys the Butterfly Effect after each one of the Tour de France stages with the help of my boy Garrett, who does all the editing. But I told you guys then, and I took a lot of flack. I said they're racing as amateurs basically through those first 9 stages of the 21 Tour de France. Okay, if I backed you up to 2020, that's a little bit different story because UAE team members did not have the force that they have right now in 2024 when we're talking 2020. Tadej Pogačar won that Tour de France. Primož Roglič had a bad individual time trial on the penultimate day of the Tour de France and lost it, but he dominated the Tour de France all the way up into that stage 20 when Tadej Pogačar won. So tactically, there was not much you could do wrong in 2020 because Tadej Pogačar was just following what he could with Primož Roglič and, of course, with the Colombian Egan Bernal attacking each other. Then Tadej Pogačar winning some stages, but not with any real tactics from the team. It was follow, try to take time, and, of course, dominate on the individual time trial. But in 2021, when the Butterfly Effect was just starting to fully get into its flow, and I started giving you guys the tactical mistakes that riders were making throughout the professional peloton. Remember, this is not a recap channel. I am mainly a coaching channel. I analyze the races and I tell you stories, but mainly I am a coaching channel without a doubt. I do not do recaps. You want recaps, you can find that over there on Peacock for sure. They'll give you the simple version of what bike racing is like in a short amount of time, but up here on the Beyond the Coverage and the Butterfly Effect, it's mainly a coaching channel, analyzing and storytelling, of course, but I like to bring the experience that I have and bring it to you guys so when you're watching the races, you can understand why it happened. So let's go into 2021 a little bit in the Tour de France and go through those first 9 stages just briefly, where I told you his teammates, UAE team members, Tadej Pogačar's teammates, were attacking and following attacks and always going in the move. When I was there with NBC, I was saying, no, this is the wrong way to do it. Tadej Pogačar is the hands-down best rider in the world, along with Primož Roglič, and there was nobody else. Those were the 2 best riders in the world for sure, because Jonas Vingegaard hadn't started to shine yet. Remco Evenepoel, well, he was just a blip on the radar at that moment. But when we start looking at the tactics there from UAE team members, as I told you then, they just need to ride their team on the front. They need to control the peloton. They need to get Tadej Pogačar close to the finish of the race and launch the Slovenian, and he's going to win multiple times more often like that than not. But throughout the year since 2021, of course, he still won that Tour de France, but after stage 9, their tactics started to change where they no longer were sending riders up the road so much. They were protecting Tadej Pogačar, delivering him to the last final climb, and then letting the Slovenian start attacking. But they fall away from that tactic the following years when we're talking about 2022 and when we're talking about 2023. In 2022 at the Tour de France, stage 11, we all remember that, right? Probably the best bike racing we have ever witnessed from the Chesterfield when the riders were going at each other with Primož Roglič and Jonas Vingegaard, then Jumbo-Visma, attacking Tadej Pogačar left and right. And does he wait for his teammates to come back? No, he doesn't. He starts throwing in his own attacks. Then he starts pulling on the front, doing 4 kilometers over the top of the climb with Jonas Vingegaard sitting on his wheel, forgets to eat, comes up short on calories, bonks on the Col de Granon, and loses that year's Tour de France. Again, the following year, he made tactical mistakes and used energy unwisely many times throughout the 23 edition, and Jonas Vingegaard ended up winning back-to-back Tour de France. If I highlighted since the time of this year in 2024, Tadej Pogačar, had he ridden those 2 Tour de France correctly, he'd have 5 Grand Tours right now. He'd be tied with the legend Eddie Merckx in terms of having a massive numbers, and 5 in a row he'd have. Instead, he only has 3 because the tactics were not correct. But now we start seeing in 2024, it gets a little bit more cleaned up through this season. He started at Strade Bianche. He rode his team all the way into 81 kilometers to go when his teammates were done. Well, he went solo and ended up winning the first race of the 24 season. Then he went into Milan-San Remo, and his team didn't quite deliver the results that Tadej Pogačar needed in order to win a race like Milan-San Remo, where the mountains were coming down in size, so the competition starts to go up. And of course, we know with Alpecin de Koenigs, Mathieu van der Poel, if Tadej Pogačar doesn't have the tactics incredibly perfect from the Cipressa through the top of the Poggio, well, Mathieu van der Poel is the type of rider that can make you pay. He did, as he guarded the back wheel there of Tadej Pogačar, and then he delivered a fine lead out to Jasper Philipsen, his teammate from Alpecin de Koenigs, to win Milan-San Remo. And Tadej Pogačar had to take a podium, a 3rd day at Milan-San Remo, without being able to take back-to-back wins. But the problem they had there, of course, at Milan-San Remo is what I prepared you for on Beyond the Coverage before that edition of Milan-San Remo, where I said when you were taking the young Mexican rider Del Toro, he wasn't going to be in the right position when you start the Cipressa. That means that Tadej Pogačar's whole team is behind the 8 ball on the Cipressa. On a race like Milan-San Remo, where the climb comes down and the level for the peloton comes up, Tadej Pogačar's tactics need to be spotless. Let me remind you guys, Tadej Pogačar wins everything, just about. He doesn't win the flatter stages, right? So anytime there's less hills and the level comes up, Tadej Pogačar's odds of winning start to decrease as the climb decreases. That's why Milan-San Remo had to be so perfect, and that's why I told you on the butterfly effect to bring the Mexican rider Del Toro without the experience of being able to fight for position. I love Del Toro. I have never once talked about a neo-pro racing over in Europe as much as I have Del Toro. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a coaching channel. He is inexperienced. He doesn't have the ability to start at the front of the peloton for such a right turn that you'd have to start the Cipressa. That meant that Tadej Pogačar was -1. And of course, if you lose one more rider that's in bad position, you've lost 2. That's what happened to Tadej Pogačar. They were behind the 8 ball then on. But we start fast forwarding, we start going into the Giro. They looked almost perfect at the Giro for Tadej Pogačar, with the exception of stage 1, right? Stage 1 was the big mistake there for Tadej Pogačar and his UAE Team Emirates when they went up the penultimate climb. They drove it too hard. It was Mikkel Bjerg that was driving too hard. Domin Novak wasn't on the kind of form that we saw at LBL. He was fantastic at LBL. Domin Novak has had a stellar season. But at the Giro d'Italia on the penultimate climb, stage 1, both Mikkel Bjerg and Domin Novak went too hard up the penultimate climb. That left, of course, the ace lieutenant there, Rafał Majka, for UAE Team Emirates as the sole rider to protect Tadej Pogačar and get him into that final 1.5 kilometer climb that would summit and then you drop down the descent. Well, without the help of Rafał Majka starting that final climb and drilling it at the bottom, Tadej Pogačar had to do the work. Jonathan Narvaez followed the wheel of Tadej Pogačar, and Tadej Pogačar got beat in the sprint to lose a chance of wearing the pink jersey at the Giro d'Italia from stage 1 all the way to the finish. But after that, UAE team members went to work with the tactics that I've always told you they needed to employ, of bringing the Slovenian all the way into the finish, as deep as you can into finishes of races, and then launching the Slovenian, Tadej Pogačar, to go win the race. It was no longer like we saw at the first week of the Tour de France in 2021, where they're sending teammates following attacks for goofy moves. What were you ever going to gain having a teammate in the front move if you're as strong as UAE team members have been throughout these last few seasons here of the European peloton? Let me remind you guys again, too, UAE team members have a massive number of victories, 22 victories for the Slovenian Tadej Pogačar. But if you take Tadej Pogačar out of that team, they still have 51 victories, more than any other team in the professional peloton, minus Tadej Pogačar. That's how many wins that UAE team members have taken in the season and how dominant they've been. But let's talk and stay on the tactics here, because that's really what I want to focus on, how Tadej Pogačar's racing skills have changed and the team has raced differently now here in 24. Okay, we get into the Tour de France. You're going to say, Chris, he was perfect in the Tour de France. No, he was not perfect. In fact, even on stage 4, the first summit stage there of the Tour de France, Tadej Pogačar and UAE team members were arguing going up the final climb. That slowed the pace a little bit. Tadej Pogačar had to tack at 800 meters to go, but he was attacking without his teammates being able to just drill it 100%, blow the group up, and then launch Tadej Pogačar. So even though he won that stage 4, I still believe, sitting up here at the podium here on Beyond the Coverage, that if the riders had ridden behind Tactically Intelligent, they could have either reduced the gap significantly to Tadej Pogačar on that stage 4 that he won, or possibly even had brought him back. Could you imagine if they had brought Tadej Pogačar back on stage 4, and now all of a sudden he has to deal with Primož Roglič, Remco Evenepoel, Jonas Vingegaard, and Carlos Rodriguez was in that group. Remember how fast he went down that descent on stage 4? It was a magical ride. So UAE team members throughout the 24 season were great through the Giro. They were solid through Liège-Bastogne-Liège, where Tadej Pogačar won from La Redoute. But even there, they didn't have Almeida and Hershey drilling it up La Redoute. It was Domen Novak doing the work there. So they didn't use all of their team at LBL. But the Giro, they were about stellar, if not almost perfect there, minus that stage 1. Now we go into the Tour de France, as I was still talking about after stage 4. Well, I got to bring you into stage 9, where Tadej Pogačar fell off the most basic of tactics again when they're on the Gravelstone stage, and Tadej Pogačar's tacking 80, 100 kilometers out without using his teammates. Remember, that stage when you're talking about 170, 180 kilometers, whatever the stage distance was that day, Tadej Pogačar was attacking a long ways out with still 90, 100 kilometers to go. So it's not enough time for the quality riders like Primož Roglič, Remco Evenepoel, and Jonas Vingegaard to get tired and fatigued. And if the other riders from behind had just let Tadej Pogačar go, okay, there's a little question mark, because there was a breakaway up the road that Tadej Pogačar could possibly make it to. He would have made it to him, and then maybe those guys work with him. They would have all been extreme knuckleheads, but we know there's knuckleheads out there. I've made a whole channel out of it. So when we look at that stage 9 on the Gravelstone stage, if Tadej Pogačar had attacked early like he did and the other riders had let the gap go and just left him out there, well, the scenario might have been a bit different. Either way, Tadej Pogačar's tactics on that stage were wrong. Then we start going up to stage 11, where again he attacked without using the force there from Adam Yates. I said they should have used Adam Yates a little bit, either to pull on the front and make it harder, or send Adam Yates up the road and put pressure on Jonas Vingegaard to pull him back. Instead, Tadej Pogačar went. He bonked again at this year's Tour de France. Jonas Vingegaard caught him on that stage 11 and then won the stage 11, which highlighted the first 2 weeks of the Tour de France and left all of us sitting on the Chesterfield wondering if Jonas Vingegaard was going to win a third Tour de France. Was it going to possibly happen? Well, we saw afterwards that Tadej Pogačar just had a calorie issue again, then went on to dominate this year's Tour de France with 6 stage victories, winning 19, 20, and 21, and winning it in the correct tactics. They controlled the group. Okay, one of the last 2 mountain stages there, they let Soler go up the road, but that was just because UAE team members, Tadej Pogačar had a bucket full of wins already, 4 at that moment, if not 5. I can't remember exactly, but he had a lot. He hadn't won the last individual time trial yet, so we'll call it 4. But Solaire's going up the road. Okay, Solaire's group gets caught. Tadej Pogačar goes for the win. He ends up with 6 stage victories at the Tor of France. Mainly racing throughout that year's Tor of France, the tactics that I've said that the Slovenian needs to employ throughout his career. But it's getting a little bit sharper. He leaves the Tor de France, goes over to Quebec. He attacks up the final climb with just about 2 kilometers to go. He's attacking. Arnaud Delis is following his wheel. Now at this moment, once I fast forward you in the Montreal race, it was Brian Smith, the commentator from GCN. I'll call it Max, that's the official word. Brian Smith said tactically that was a mistake from Arnaud Delis to follow Tadej Pogačar. It was not a mistake. In fact, it was the only correct tactic that Arnaud Delis from Lotto Destiny, last year's winner there at Quebec, could do if he wanted a shot at winning Quebec, because if you follow Tadej Pogačar and you can hold on to his wheel, once he sees that it's just one rider on his wheel, there's the high possibility that Tadej Pogačar would have continued to pull with Arnaud Delis on his wheel. He has a shot at winning the stage. If Arnaud Delis is not on his wheel, Tadej Pogačar does not hesitate and question his form, question whether or not if his legs can go the distance there at Quebec, those last 1.5 kilometers, to be able to win solo, because if Arnaud Delis is not on his wheel, Tadej Pogačar goes 100% at Quebec, and he would have won Quebec, and he would have won, which we know now, Montreal the following Sunday. So when you're looking at the tactics there from Arnaud Delis, as Brian Smith said, where he said they were all wrong, he should have stayed in the peloton. No, he shouldn't have. He had to go. Then Arnaud Delis just had the hope that Tadej Pogačar would sell out at the front trying to drop Arnaud Delis and he wins the sprint. That was the only option that Arnaud Delis had. It didn't work out that way. That's the way it goes. Now we fast forward into Montreal after Quebec, where we saw fine UAE team members riding 100% all for Tadej Pogačar. Some small attacks here and there, but in general they were riding just about 100% for Tadej Pogačar. And when we go into Montreal, we see exactly again the tactics that I wanted to see from Tadej Pogačar. Put your team on the front. They have 7 riders. That means he has 6 quality teammates. Rafał Majka's there, his ace lieutenant. There's no doubt about that. Dominik Novak is on fine form. Tim Wellens was riding good. Juan Ayuso's there. Igor Arrieta's there. And then, of course, we look at the next rider, and that's Finn Fisher-Black. With Finn Fisher-Black and Igor riding most of the tempo throughout that race, it wasn't until we get into 60 kilometers ago with about 5 laps that we see Juan Ayuso riding the front. Now they had to break up the road of 3 riders. Later became 4 riders, 1 dropping, and then with Mate Mohoric getting up there, forget about the break. But I'll get to that in other videos on Beyond the Coverage coming up this week as we talk about how to beat Tadej Pogačar. But at this moment, they're riding with Juan Ayuso on the front, and they have 5 riders. He does 1 full lap, and then a little bit extra. He hands it off to Tim Wellens. Tim Wellens does a full lap, each time hitting the climb, passing it off to the next rider. When the next rider comes up, Dominik Novak rides a full percent all the way into 2 laps to go. He hits the final climb, the only real climb there at the Montreal race, excuse me. As he hits the climb, Dominik Novak pulls off. Rafał Majka goes to work. Now, Rafał Majka knows what to do here. He's literally employed to just look after Tadej Pogačar and do 500 meters, 1K, 1.5K for Tadej Pogačar. If the team was to fall apart, they have to use a different tactic. But at Montreal, last Sunday's race, the team did not fall apart. They did not have to use a different tactic. So we see Rafał Majka drilling it at the front. He'll pull for, we'll call it 800 meters. Once he pulls off, Tadej Pogačar solos from 23 kilometers to go with beautiful tactics. Now, if I give you some other little mistakes that could have been made there at that Montreal race, if I back it up just a little bit, where Juan Ayuso had finished his pull after doing a lap and then some on the front of the peloton solo, he pulls off at about 250 meters to go from the summit of that climb. If they had backed the pressure off just a hair, if Tim Wellens holds up the pace just a little bit, maybe, quite possibly, and I'm almost 99.9% sure, Juan Ayuso makes it over the top of that climb, and then you have 2 riders to be able to ride the front with Tim Wellens and Juan Ayuso on the front. So UAE team members were not perfect. I have never been perfect throughout my career at a bike race, but at Montreal, they were almost perfect and as close as you can get it, with the exception of just not hesitating on the pace there to allow Juan Ayuso to make it over that climb, which would have gave him even more force going around the next lap, which would have made it more difficult for the riders at the back when it was strung out single file through the lefts, the rights, the ups, downs, and the rough, bumpy roads there in Montreal. Either way, though, when it was all said and done, after 23 kilometers to go, it was Tadej Pogačar putting on quite a show there, while the other racers behind, we'll call them about 25, 30 riders strong, 8 teams with multiple different riders, and none of the teams would just commit to putting riders on the front. So Tadej Pogačar was left with no one back there chasing him. That was the main thing that I looked at Montreal, the mistake from all the other teams. UAE Team Emirates, almost perfect, but when you look at Visma Lease Bike, having 4 riders in that chase group, and they can't put anyone on the front, and they're still trying to attack to catch the #1 ranked rider in the world, who you had already seen almost solo at Quebec on the Friday race, and now he's going solo with 23 kilometers to go. And instead of Visma Lease Bike riding 3 guys on the front, they had Jorgensen in there, who had fine form. You had Thijs Benoot in there. You had Wilco Kelderman in there, and you had Bart Lemon in there. And instead, they had their riders attacking going up the road instead of the 3 riders back here working for one, Matteo Jorgensen, who clearly is their best rider on their team at Visma Lease Bike when Jonas Vingegaard is not in the race. So that was a mistake from them. You look at EF Education, Ben Healy, and you look, of course, at Nielsen Paulus, where Paulus was attacking going up the road. No, you have to ride the front with the other teams. You look over at Israel Premier Tech when I'm talking Michael Woods, and they have Jakob Fulsang, my old teammate back there from the radio days. Fulsang's attacking going up the road when he has Michael Woods, who was on stellar fitness level. Tactically and racecraft, Michael Woods' form was not that good at Montreal. He started at the back of that climb when Tadej Pogačar was launching going up the road. But if you see him at the top there going over the KOM, Michael Woods had fantastic form because he came from about 25th spot after Tadej Pogačar was attacking past the group and ended up catching up to Jorgensen and Peo Bilbao, who went over the top of that climb together. But, of course, those riders hesitated. We saw Jai Hindley on that back group. All 4 riders hesitated. The group came back together. Tadej Pogačar's bombing down the descent at 68 kilometers an hour, going through the right turn at the bottom. And if I show you the picture in the back of the peloton, 3 riders at the front there are all looking backwards, hesitate while Tadej Pogačar is doing almost 70 kilometers an hour. You're not going to catch the Slovenian that way. Everyone at Montreal raced like amateurs, but Tadej Pogačar and UAE Team Emirates, you guys were spectacular at Montreal. And when we get into the Road World Championships, I'll have all you guys prepped of what to pay attention to coming up to. So make sure you like and subscribe, because right now at this moment, Tadej Pogačar is doing his best tactical racing that I've ever seen throughout his career, and his fitness, it seems to be the highest that it has ever been throughout the years since he first started winning the Tor of France in 2020, now finishing up with the victory at the Montreal race. So like and subscribe, and I'll bring you guys some more inside tactical effects here for Tadej Pogačar, Team Slovenia, getting ready for this year's 24 Road World Championships. See you on the next edition real soon.